Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about what's happening in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, because members of the DC community and a DC council person are actually calling for the National Guard to be deployed on DC streets, due in large part to the fact that it's become essentially a war zone. Crime is up across the board, which is not surprising based on the fact that not too long ago they introduced legislation in order to soften penalties for everything, including murder, and this was championed not just by the local woke DC City Council people, but by the White House itself. Here the press secretary praised this bill and how progressive it is.
To the team, and we have a couple of things that I just want to lay out for all of you and on what the DC bill does. It reduces maximum penalties for offenses like murders and other homicides, armed home invasion burglaries, armed carjackings, as I mentioned, armed robberies, unlawful gun possession, and some sexual assault.
Well, it's led to upticks in crime in every single category. We're going to get into this. We're going to break this down. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you to everybody who signed up over at actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
And thank you to the podcast listeners, Spotify, Apple, and Google's podcasting platform.
There's a lot of pain in this community and a lot of frustration. Some DC leaders believe it's time to bring in the National Guard. They're saying this crime is out of control and it's time to call for backup.
Say my son's name, Bernard Hodges!
The mother of Bernard Hodges, the victim of the Good Hope shooting, is pleading on city leaders for change.
So it's very important for people in these communities, in these left-wing communities that vote overwhelmingly majority Democrat, to be shown on TV, to have their messages heard when they realize that the soft on crime policies are leading to absolutely disastrous results, so that we can move forward and actually change what's going on in this country. So this mother lost her child. She wants people to say his name.
Say my son's name, Bernard Hodges!
The mother of Bernard Hodges, the victim of the Good Hope shooting, is pleading on city leaders for change.
And I have to be perfectly honest, it is actually quite refreshing to see the say his name chant that we often have reserved for criminals that end up encountering the police, that Black Lives Matter, the organization, ends up lying about, in relation to victims of senseless gun violence from within this community, because this never gets the national attention that somebody like a Michael Brown, who is 100% in the wrong, would get by comparison. So I like that. I like that this tactic is being deployed right here, and I like to see people within this community come together, business owners, everyday citizens, victims, relatives, to try to produce a change, not just in terms of policy, but as we'll find out through the course of this segment, in terms of the culture of Washington, D.C.
Community members, business owners, and church leaders stood by her side.
And we're here today standing in solidarity, saying enough is enough.
Good Hope Road was the scene of a triple homicide on Saturday. On Sunday, another shooting near Wilmington Place that left one man dead and another in the hospital. On Friday, a double homicide in Adams Morgan.
Just listen to that. Just listen to those incidents that happened all over the weekend, this past weekend in our nation's capital. An area which, by the way, has so much money attached to it. Some of the richest zip codes are in Washington, D.C., due to the lobbyists, that just a few minutes away is a complete and utter war zone. And by the way, it's not just anecdotes, it's the statistics. So the DC Metro Police, which releases their murder numbers every single year and year over year, so we could see them up to date, has shown us that the amount of crime that has gone up in DC in terms of violent crime is up 37%. Now, homicides in particular went from 126 to 161, a 28% change. This is, by the way, on par with the escalation in murder that happened in this country during the year-over-year increase for the Black Lives Matter riots. But as you can see, sexual abuse up 19%. And by the way, we'll wait on the victimization surveys to figure out how bad that actually is. Assault with a dangerous weapon up 4%. Burglary, the only crime that appears to be down, is down 5%. But motor vehicle theft up over 100%. Theft from auto, which is car break-ins, just 1%. Theft overall up 25%, and as you can see, property crime overall is up 29%, and total crime is up 30%. Now, very interesting to me, for all the people who argue that these are all just innocent Aladdins stealing in order to, feed starving children, is the fact that our economic crimes, except for specifically theft, which by the way has a lot to do with the lack of prosecution of retail theft, are either down or in and around the same area. In terms of burglary, it's not happening as much in the District of Columbia, which you would expect if this was all motivated by economic desperation. Also, theft from auto, which would be car burglaries, is only up in and around 1%. So again, not a dramatic increase in that category, which is what you would expect if the criminals were homeless, if they were more desperate, and all that. Now, that doesn't excuse that doesn't make that acceptable, but it's just interesting that the statistics are showing us that violent crime in particular is up in Washington, D.C., but not surprising because we've talked about in the past that the DC Metro Police Force has lost a bunch of members. They're down a significant percentage, just like many departments across this country, and even their attempts to improve recruiting have not actually resolved the problem because they doubled their recruiting budget, yet they're still at a third of their goals each and every month, and it's only getting worse.
To the team, and we have a couple of things that I just want to lay out for all of you and on what the DC bill does. It reduces maximum penalties for offenses like murders and other homicides, armed home invasion burglaries, armed carjackings, as I mentioned, armed robberies, unlawful gun possession, and some sexual assault.
Now, it's really important to understand that that legislation that was passed in the District of Columbia was passed based on the same logic often put forward by left-wingers who are interested in denying crime, and it was exactly the type of arguments that I was going up against in my conversation/debate with Sam Seder. If you look at the 2022 numbers, what you would have found out is that homicide was actually down 10% at that year, and these are the completed numbers from 2022. And DC politicians cited that decline and other declines totaling in about a 7% total decline in crime in the District of Columbia for a justification that it wasn't the reforms, that it was actually the pandemic that caused the crime spike, and that there was nothing to be worried about. However, when you pull back a little bit, when you look at what is going on in the homicide numbers in a 20-year trend, what you would find out, and this is exactly what I was pointing out to Sam Seder, to all these woke liberals who bring up the same exact counter explanation to me talking about the data, was that decrease was only slight and it was against a dramatic increase in homicides. Let's look at the numbers so you could see the fatal conceit of these policies. So from 2003, where they had 248 murders, you can see a pretty consistent, even though there's bumps along the way, decline in the homicide numbers in the District of Columbia. As you can see, in 2012, they actually had 88 homicides. That's going to be the best possible year. But then it starts fluctuating up and down here and there. But then there is a significant jump beyond the levels that were normal, even the highs over the last couple of years, the last decade, to 198 in 2020. Then it jumps again past the numbers that we saw in 2004 to 226, then the decline in 2023 happens after that rate of increase. But as you can see, compared to the 166 number, the consistent number that we were seeing in the District of Columbia, they're still up about 40. So if you guys need this explained a little bit more simply to you, it's essentially like this. The so-called 10% decrease that we saw in 2022, which by the way is in and around 23 people for the District of Columbia, is still up 25%. So the net increase from 2019 is 25%, thus letting us see that homicide was elevated. However, they pulled the Sam Seder, looked at only the decline after the dramatic increase, and decided that, hey, everything was a-okay. So now we're starting to approach numbers that we haven't seen in the District of Columbia in the last 20 years in terms of homicide, because they took a little bit of a drop, an insignificant drop after a dramatic increase, and pretended it was an overall trend. Where have I heard this before? Even though clearly, if you look at this, the trend is upward. The trend is concerning, and you should be fighting back against it.
Heard from the mother of Bernard Hodges. She says the community also needs to do a better job of speaking up when they see something.
We need to stop being afraid of saying we're snitching. That word needs to go under the ground. Under the ground. We need to bury that word. There's no such thing as snitching. when you're trying to protect your community.
Now, I love this sentiment from the mother right here. She says, we need to get rid of this stop snitching culture. It is not helping you. It doesn't help the community when you're protecting the worst actors and those who are killing other people within the community. That needs to be dismissed from the vocabulary. And in and around them calling for the National Guard, and by the way, they also called for more police and also called for more mental health programs. They also called for after-school programs and all these other additional things. I think this is the most crucial because this is something that can be changed without anything from the city. A change in the culture would lead to better results. It's not all about the resources. However, the fact that there is a growing sentiment among residents in the District of Columbia that they need to deploy the National Guard really goes to show you how out of hand this actually is, and how going back to a near 20-year high to numbers we haven't seen for 2 decades is not going to be tolerated, hopefully, by members of this community. So I am proud of them for stepping up. I'm sorry for this woman's loss. I'm sorry for everybody's loss that are going on in the District of Columbia, but mostly I'm sorry for the left wing trying to pretend away this crime increase, saying, oh, well, it declined in the last 4 days, so we're totally fine.
Children in the Southeast community no longer feel safe. The wife of Hodges says he worked several jobs to provide for his family. She says he was strong, intelligent, and a family man who leaves behind 4 boys.
We gotta do better, because I'm hurting. I'm hurt. And I'm trying to stay strong because he would want me to be strong, but I'm hurt. I have boys. I have 4 men I have to raise without a man in a house.
And again, one of the things that you realize when you go through these stories is you have people trying to do the right thing. This woman was married. She had 4 children with her husband. He was working multiple jobs in order to support his family, and he gets gunned down, and now she's turned into a single mother raising 4 boys, and statistically, the outcomes for that are just not good. They ended up due to the fact that they allowed criminality to run wild, leading to a situation where a stable, functioning family unit was wiped out, and now we don't know the fate, potentially, of those 4 young men as they grow up. You had a guy doing the right thing, a statistical anomaly in black communities in the United States of America, and his life was ripped away from him due to the senseless violence, and more importantly, due to policies implemented by people who never have to face the consequences of those policies. The people like Sam Cedar who do statistical manipulations would never live in any of these neighborhoods. They would try to avoid visiting them to the most extent humanly possible. They would never face the consequences of their criminality, and if they were confronted by a criminal, they would immediately demand the harshest consequences. If it was a member of their family, their spouse, they would lose their minds, yet they condemn their fellow citizens because it makes them feel virtuous rather than facing the realities of the crime spike. We have to fight back against it. It is a good sign when we see members of the community stepping up in this way. So rather than laugh at them, rather than declare you voted for this, or whatever nonsense people try to put forward, I think it's better to embrace these people, welcome them aboard, and start to work on the policies that will actually make the lives of the American people better. When we got Democrats on board for tough on crime legislation, by the way, led from the Democratic side by the current president of the United States, we saw a almost undisturbed 30-year decline in homicide and other violent crimes across this nation. This is what we can achieve on this issue if we work together. It's a foundational issue. It's a winning issue. So let's get to work trying to fix it. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like. Subscribe for more content. Follow me on my social media. Support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the chaos in DC. Till next time.